Raging for the truth, exposing corruption, dismantling the false left-right paradigm. He's Alex Jones.
On Friday and Saturday, the world witnessed the lame duck President Bush, with less than 100 days left in office, 99 to be exact, and financial leaders from nations, rich and poor, pledged Saturday to intensify their efforts to unlock a frozen financial system before it does more damage to an increasingly shaky global economy. Gotta love it, the people that have engineered all this posing as the saviors. You see, the same people that own the Federal Reserve on the Bank of England, the same people that owned the private German banks, not all the banks, not the low-level banks that you think of as a bank that gives you a loan, the private central banks, the private families that control the issuance of currency and credit. The Federal Reserve is private. The Bank of England is private. They're privately owned. And so you have these world financial leaders via the governments meeting and pledging to give unlimited power to the private inner coterie of the central banks. Now, we told you what was in there, and the same legislation has been passed in England. Carbon taxes. You will be paying carbon taxes on what you breathe and what you eat and what you do, a feudalist tax, a serf tax, to the private banks. They have that set up where you'll pay directly to them. They will be able to have new regulations that they put on low-level and mid-level economic organizations, banks, insurance companies, brokerage firms. And so they can break all the rules. They can do whatever they want. They get all of our money, our currency. They get to use it now while it still has value. Over the next 2 years, it will fully devalue our currency. Things will then even implode more, and the central banks of the world will have even more power and real assets to be able to buy up everything else for pennies on the dollar, or pennies on the pound, or pennies on the euro, or pennies on the yen or yuan, or pennies on the ruble or the shekel or the denarii. That's what banks do. It's a massive economic monopoly game. They changed the laws in Europe and the United States simultaneously in the mid-'90s, simultaneously in 95 and then in 99, simultaneously, just like they acted simultaneously to cut interest rates that'll devalue the dollar even more, because it's the world reserve currency and because people now won't buy those securities. Look, it's all very complex. Bottom line, it is stated in IMF and World Bank documents. It is stated in Club of Rome documents. It is stated in Trilateral Commission documents. We've written articles about it. We have the quotes. This is public, that they are orchestrating this. And I've come on the air day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, telling you this was coming in 2008. And it would only deepen until 2010. Now, I also told you on record they would propose, and they now have in the Wall Street Journal and the Sunday Times of London and everywhere else, every major publication, a new world order. That's the headline. Just Google New World Order in Google News. Don't only pull up news sources. Hundreds of articles, all mainstream, going, oh, my God, the banking crisis caused by a few greedy Americans that lied on their applications. Oh, we'll have to have a world government run by the bankers and never let this happen again. Private banks did the same thing for 30 years up till 1913, and then advertised the private Federal Reserve to fix it all, and then they gave us an even bigger depression. I'm somewhat of a historian, only because it's so interesting, and I've studied quite a bit about the Great Depression. They would call in whole loans on houses, cars, on farms, and people might have paid $100,000 over 20 years for a farm, and they only owned $1,000, $2,000. They said they were calling it in. And the banks would cut off the money supply as they implemented the Depression. And they would send out Pinkerton Security, the National Guard, the Army. And there were hundreds of cases in Kentucky, and hundreds in Colorado, and hundreds in the Dakotas, and New York, and New Jersey, and Michigan, and Texas, where they would come up with troops, and they would just mow whole farms down. They would there were pitched battles between hundreds of farmers trying to keep their farms in the military. The U.S. military, you would have World War I bonus strikers who 20-something years later had never gotten their bonus they were promised. And they would peacefully go to the Capitol and camp out, and they sent in tanks and men on horseback with machine guns and killed hundreds. And now you see the same thing, the news saying, yeah, the Army's got brigades ready for this if there's any financial riots. Yeah, they've been training police with the military to, for financial riots for years. That's right. For years I've been telling you about it, gearing up for it. And then we have a story out of the Boston Globe last night, postponing the election. Is it a joke or is it? And the article never really gives any facts or proof. It just says that basically we're liars. But then at the end of the story says, well, actually it's true. We are actually already under martial law with Presidential Decision Directive 51. And they go on to say, the Democrats think George Bush is going to declare martial law to keep Barack Obama out of office. Then they link to sites that post my news. They don't link to Infowars.com, Prism.com. They link to sites that have my story posted. So they're linked to my stories. The stories that Paul Watson and Kurt Nimmo put out in the last couple of weeks on this about martial law, and with the interviews with congressmen and the rest of it. They don't put that in the article, they just link to it. Where Congress was told, you pass this or you will be thrown out and martial law will be declared. The executive can't tell the legislative that. They're not above them. In fact, the government says things are co-equal. That's not really true. The legislative is really above the judicial and the executive if you really read the balance, the majority of the arguments by the founders. I just so happen to have read all that and had constitutional scholars on because it's so interesting. Because if you know history, you know the future. Okay, so the Congress is above the president. They pass the laws. They have the separation of powers. The founders put the most power in the body that had the most diversity and the biggest number of people, knowing it'd be hard for a dictatorship to take over that with hundreds of members. 500 and something today. But the executive tells them, you will pass this or we will dissolve the Congress. And then the media calls it a rumor. But the point here is, I'm not saying George Bush is going to declare martial law. We're already under martial law when Congress is threatened, do this or you'll be dissolved. That is martial law. And I've told you, George Bush is a nobody puppet. I told you all these powers would be given to a John McCain or Barack Obama. Probably a Barack Obama. And Barack Obama has gotten 3 times the contributions from Wall Street, the private bankers that own this country through fraud, and 4 times from Goldman Sachs, which is running the receivership operation for the private families. They're just the hired thug to do it. And so we lay out exactly what's going to happen, and the Boston Globe kind of tongue-in-cheek makes jokes about it, but then links to a lot of proof that it is happening, but makes it a conspiracy where if we don't see martial law in the next 23 days, 24 days, that it was all made up, because you've got Naomi Wolf and you've got Amy Goodman, the liberals, out saying, they're seeing all this freaking out, thinking, oh my God, it's George Bush, because they can't see the evil in the Democratic Party. The Democrats are owned by the very same people. Barack Obama comes in, he's the new FDR, we go into the police state receivership. We're under martial law with these checkpoints and face scanning cameras and everything tracking us, and the banks, the private banks owning and running the government and threatening martial law to the Congress if they don't submit. So we'll come back and break down what's really happening and take your calls. Stay with us. I'm Alex Jones. These are the times that try men's souls.